Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of What's Up with That Alex. My name is Simon Kent, and I'm a co-founder of Connect Family Law. And with me today is
Alex Boland, your Kelowna expatriate family law practitioner.
Nice to see you, Alex.
Very good to see you too.
Normally, we do these videos in person, but of course, we're doing this during the COVID times. So we've tried to keep things as authentic as we've had in the past, which is with the roaring fire here on my laptop, a very comfy sweater. Yours looks a little more Hugh Hefnerish to me from a distance, but
I describe myself as the Hugh Hefner of Simon Kent. So there you go.
Nice. Yeah. Well, listen, Alex, as you know, and our viewership knows, this is an opportunity for me to ask you some questions about family law. In this particular episode, I'm going to be asking you one question, and let's see what you got for us in the viewership. Okay, are you ready?
Fire away.
Okay, so my question has to do with travel. Now, obviously, right now we can't travel because of COVID, but eventually we're going to. And a good friend of mine who is divorced and has two kids, his ex-spouse is saying to him that the minute that the COVID restrictions lift, she's going to take the kids on a trip to Mexico, whether he likes it or not. Now, that's going to be during her time with the kids. They're on a 7-on, 7-off schedule. But my buddy asked me, like, is that normal? Like, is that legal for her to do that? What if I don't want them to go to Mexico? So what's up with that, Alex? Can she actually do that?
It's a good question. And the answer is maybe. So, and that's all for this episode of no. No, so the first question is a practical one. And that's really, can she actually do it in the sense of, does she have the children's passports? Because if she doesn't have their passports, then no one's going anywhere, really. And that's often the first place we start when we're thinking about this kind of question: can it happen? So presuming that she has passports, the next question is, can she travel, as far as the government of Canada is concerned, on those passports without the consent of the other parent? Now, the answer is probably yes. Usually she could leave the country with the passports and the children without the consent of the other parent, although the government of Canada recommends that anytime one parent is traveling with the other, they bring with them a notarized consent letter permitting the trip. So best practice, if your friend's partner was traveling, or his ex-partner was traveling, she would have a notarized consent letter from her former spouse saying, I'm agreeing to travel. Now, I have never actually had a client who was refused entry to another country for failing to have that letter. I'm told it does happen, but it happens pretty rarely, and the letters are very rarely checked for. So they're not a good way of preventing travel you don't agree to. And so how do you go about preventing travel if you're not in agreement with it? And I think there's two ways of looking at it. One is through the Family Law Act legislation that applies to parents in British Columbia. And what you'd be first asking is, do these people have an order or an agreement about parenting? And if they do, does the order or agreement talk about travel? Most of the time when people have a separation agreement, the separation agreement will include some parameters about what kind of travel is permissible. Often people don't really have a problem with the other spouse traveling within British Columbia or within Canada. And often within the United States, beyond that, it becomes a bit more of a situation where most people want to have some input on where their children are going. So first place to check is she permitted to do it under her agreement or under her order? If the agreement or order says no, then probably under the Family Law Act, she couldn't go. If the agreement or order says yes, then there's no impediment to her going. Okay? So there's another two questions that flow from this. First would be, assuming the agreement or order is silent on travel, or assuming there's no agreement or order at all, can she travel with the children? And there the answer is yes. Basically how it works in BC is that each parent, if there's no agreement or order that says otherwise, has an ability to make decisions about the children. They're supposed to do so in consultation with the other parent, but neither party gets the final decision. So in your case, assuming no order or agreement, the mom could travel with the children, and if the ex-husband doesn't like it, his only recourse is to go to court. So then when the court is asked to deal with travel, and it is often asked to deal with travel, this is an issue that comes up relatively often, The court is sort of weighing the pros and cons of the travel and deciding whether or not to permit it. So it's looking at things like, are we talking about a newborn child? Are we talking about, 10-year-old or teenagers? There's questions about, is there a rational fear that the other party won't return? So for example, if somebody is going to war-torn Syria, there might be a real concern that they will not come back. Whereas if somebody is going to France, it's quite easy to have children return from France. So the court is sort of weighing those pros and cons. Usually, most judges feel that travel is an enriching experience, a positive experience, and are quite happy to permit reasonable travel. So in a post-COVID world, I would expect the court to probably allow a trip to Mexico if it came right down to it.
Right. It's interesting. You brought up that issue about consent letters. And yeah, I was separated and divorced now, God, I guess 18 years ago. And every year or every trip that we would take, I would need one of those consent letters. And at times it became a bit contentious, but I don't think anyone ever checked. So there was a lot of anxiety around getting those letters from my ex, but no one ever checked at the airport in all those years. So it's sort of interesting, but it was going to be the one day that I didn't have that letter that someone was going to check.
Yeah, and there are, sometimes people will call Canada Border Services and say, I'm worried my spouse is going to flee the country. And sometimes Canada Border Services will sort of, if not flag, then pay extra attention to that person's travel. And in that kind of context, I would really want to have that kind of travel letter. Yeah. But I think the message is that don't count on that as being a barrier to travel, right?
Yeah, completely agree. Okay, well, that's great. So thanks so much for the answer to that. I appreciate it. And we'll talk to you again soon. Bye, everybody.